Welcome back. I'm Todd Miller at the Phaders On Stun Studios in lovely Ajax, Ontario. And I'm not alone, and we'll get to my guest in a second. We're going to talk about a topic that probably not a lot of people have given much thought to. It's one of those things that resides in the back of our heads. We take it for granted a lot, that things will just remain the way they are and allow us to continue doing what we do every day. I'm going to ask the question, and the question is, well, let's imagine you were not able to do what you do for anywhere from a day to several months, and that being work. What if you had no physical access to your workspace, or no power, or no internet? God forbid, no internet. What would be the impact on your business? Let's say you're a solopreneur, entrepreneur. That's a big question. That's a big thing that would impact your life. Now, you could go to the local coffee shop and have a coffee and sit there. And you've seen those people with the earbuds on, and they're having conference calls with people all over the world. And then you try and email maybe a video file you're working on, or a CAD drawing, or landscape plans. Let's say you're a landscaper, and all of a sudden there's a little pop-up, limited Wi-Fi. So this thing that we're going to be talking about today has been called many things: business resumption, business continuity, emergency preparedness, emergency management, disaster recovery. Doesn't that sound appealing? Regardless of what it's called, it or the lack of it can play a huge role in what you are able to do, or more rightly, what you're not able to do. I have some experience with that in a previous life, but I decided to call an expert in. That expert is Greg Long, president and founder of 1033inc, a local Whitby-based business that deals with business continuity, emergency management. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, what do you call it, and what is it?
Okay, let me give you the official definition of emergency management according to Emergency Management Ontario and the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act. Their definition is a situation or impending situation that constitutes a danger of majority proportions that could result in serious harm to persons or substantial damage to property that is caused by the forces of nature, a disease or other health risk, an accident, or an act whether intentional or otherwise. Let's simply put it another way. If it takes you away from doing what you need to do, it disrupts your life, disrupts your property, it's an emergency.
Okay.
We'll keep it simple that way.
Okay, I like that. So we've got the definition. Give us a brief overview of your experience as it relates to emergency management. Was there some driving force that drove you that way, or was it cumulative experience that said, hey, I can do this?
There was a driving force. It was 9/11. And a lot of people say this, and for me it really was true. I was working with a book publishing company in Scarborough. It was a division of a much larger corporation that had offices for one of the other divisions inside the World Trade Towers. That morning, out of our family of companies, we lost 32 to 35 employees in the tower alone, and 2 people on one plane. That being quite the coincidence. It made our vice president of operations in our Scarborough location realize we were not prepared for anything that happened. And it proved out to be true a few months later, a few years later, I should say, when the SARS scare happened. It was at that point, the director of operations said to me, Greg, we need to do something about this. I want to put together a disaster planning task force. Congratulations as chair of the Joint Health and Safety Committee. You're doing my research.
Yeah.
It just went from there. So I put all of that together, realized what we didn't have at this company. They hadn't trained a fire warden, as they used to be called, for 6 years approximately at the time. They hadn't updated their plans. Nobody except one person knew how to operate the fire tree for the sprinkler system. It was a pretty bad situation, and it also tied in with the Joint Health and Safety Committee because the inspections hadn't been going on proper for 2 years. They hadn't made the progress with their programming that they wanted to. So it all just rolled into me and was on top of my regular facility maintenance and repair job.
So apart from it being a good idea to make sure that there's business continuity, i.e. if something happens that takes you away from what you do, you can still continue that business elsewhere. And we'll get into that in a second.
Okay.
There's also a lot of legal liability, I would assume, in my previous experience, we had certain chemicals that were stored on site, and they needed to be stored at certain temperatures, lest they do what they do and explode or whatever. So there were a lot of legal liabilities that we needed to ensure the community was safe. And you would agree with that?
Oh, definitely. Two phrases to think of: duty of care, standard of care. They sound similar, but they're not. There's a standard. What is that minimum level of care that you put into place, or responsibility that you take? And then duty of care. If you run a business, you have people working for you. You have a responsibility to those people who work for you, to keep them safe, to send them home at night. You also have a duty of care to those who come into your business to utilize your services.
Right.
If you're not doing it, you're liable in so many ways.
So how long has 1033 been helping people with emergency management?
The concept of starting the business was in 2004. That was around the time of SARS and the big blackout in Toronto.
Right.
That one sadly created a problem with my father-in-law's health, and we lost him a few months after that. But it was around that time that I started thinking about doing this. I had developed a lot of basic knowledge in emergency management, doing the research for the company I was with. I had unofficially taken a lot of the little FEMA emergency management courses, read every document that I could find on the internet and various locations. I built up a breadth of information and knowledge from it, and it really interested me. So I decided, as a side business, because I wasn't completely happy doing what I was doing, let's start helping people on the side. Created the first realms of it, which were not entirely successful, much as the case with entrepreneurials. And I've been trying to build it it's been very slow since that time, because I can see the need that is there.
Yeah.
We small business people don't do always what we're supposed to.
No, we're going to touch on that in a second. And why I say that is because let's first of all talk about some of the most common factors that can impact a business not being able to do what it does. Can you give us some examples?
Fire, flood, bomb scares, chemical leaks. Something happens at another facility. You've got a chemical processor in your neighborhood. They have a spill. What type of gas is it? Is it lighter than air? Is it heavier than air? Is it going to move close? Is it going to just dissipate? Those things can happen. Snow loads, weather. We saw that specifically in Eastern Ontario and Quebec a number of years ago in the early 2000s, where everything was shut down and every portable generator that was available got sent to them.
All of those towers, I remember seeing them full of ice, twisted, fall into the ground. You may think it just impacts you at home and your ability to stream Netflix, but it has a much greater impact than just that. So obviously, a lot of these things, like the power issue, the blackout affected businesses and personal, but there are instances, the Mississauga train derailment back in 1977 had a huge impact on the community. And while there is nothing that you can do necessarily to prevent that, there's a whole lot that you can do to say, what if?
Yeah.
Why is there such a perception, and I know this coming from my previous background, why is there such a perception that this only impacts larger businesses, and people like you and I who run smaller businesses or home-based businesses shouldn't be planning, or don't worry about it?
Part of it is the mentality of the small businessman. My business is still a small business, so it's contained within a really nicely set up office within my basement. It was designed specifically for that. I've got presumably everything that I need right there. I'm not reliant on any other business. I'm not reliable.
You're in your bubble.
I'm in my bubble. That's the perfect phrase for it. But we don't think, well, what if there's a larger community loss of power? There's a loss of water. Like I said, there's something that requires us to evacuate our neighborhood. Snow loads, the whole thing. A big business, we think of needing it because they're millions of dollars of profits a year, or billions for that matter. Whereas the small entrepreneur, solopreneur, as you put it, we're talking anywhere from, say, 30,000 to maybe 250,000 a year, if
really
good.
I like the way you think.
So, we think that we don't necessarily need it.
Yeah.
The truth is we need it probably more than that big business because it represents a larger percentage of our income per day.
Right.
Every day you lose your sales or your deliveries means more as a percentage of your income if you're a small business than it does if you're a major corporation. They have the resources to weather it out, possibly. We small guys don't.
Now, there are factors that I heard that if a business doesn't get back to profitability within a certain number of months, they are likely doomed after having a business continuity issue. I would expect for a solopreneur or an entrepreneur, it's a much shorter time frame without cash flow that they're going to.
Any business is going to have a problem if they can't return time to operations or RTO within 72 hours. So your critical functions need to be back up within 72 hours.
Did you hear that? 72 hours.
It's the key. Out of those that don't get up and running within 72 hours to get their basic functions, customer support, billing, they're probably 50% of them will fail then. The ones that, after the fact.
That's scary.
If you don't do it within a week, 65%. If you don't do it within a month, the last estimate I heard was approximately 80% of the businesses will fail.
That's
it's that critical.
That's incredible. So we talked about some of the most common factors that play into it, and these are, they could be weather related. They could be, as I realized the other night, we have a person digging and they accidentally cut a cable, a fiber optic cable. That's not an easy fix. That's something that could be 72 hours to several weeks without your broadband or without power or gas.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily. If you're a small businesspreneur like ourselves, you've got access to an LTE, most likely your internet over your phone, your data usage. The first thing you would have to do under those circumstances is then send out that message on your LTE if you can to all your clients. We're still in business. We're still here.
Yep.
We've got a disruption. We'll keep you appraised daily. You can save about 60 to 80% of your business that you would normally lose if you didn't contact anybody by just doing that very simple fact.
The normal reaction for a lot of people would be just to, I'm not going to tell them because I don't want them to worry. And then they find out that, in fact, that you are impacted and they've got a deadline. And like you said, if you had let them know in advance, chances are they'd go, I like working with Greg. I'm going to cut him some slack.
People are so afraid that any disruption means they don't look professional anymore. That's really not the case. The professional is the one that says, I have an issue. It's beyond our control. We're working to get by it. We're going to support you as best we can, as fast as we can, when we can. And
I had an issue this morning where I forgot to bring my SD card to record this very podcast that you are watching now. But I told Greg, I was very upfront and said, I'm an idiot. I'm going to fix it. And Greg stayed, so that's good news. What does the typical plan look like? And I don't want to get into, because I know this takes a lot of time as someone that went through several iterations of a plan. What is a typical plan? What are the key things that we want to hit?
A plan can be as simple as 15 to 20 pages, depending on what you're needing. It can be 150 pages. Ideally, your best size plan is going to be about 50 pages, because anything more than that, people are going to summarize as they read.
Right.
Or they're not going to read it if it's smaller because it doesn't look like a really good document. What you need to cover is, the first thing, you've got to identify your risks. You've got to identify how those risks and hazards are going to affect your business. What are your critical factors, your key business points?
Okay.
Those things that you have to, critical services. What has to be back up immediately? And then after that, who's going to come back in and do those things? Those key factors. Which employees are coming back in what order? What equipment do you need? Where are you going to do it? Do you have a cold site, a warm site, a hot site? What about your stock if you have a stock to deliver? How are you going to provide your service if it's just a service and everything's based out of your home or a small office? It just keeps rolling from there. There's so many things that you can include. The first thing you have to know, though, what are the potential hazards? What risk does it represent to your company? How are you going to recover? What do you need to recover and when? Testing that so that you know if it's going to work, and then making revisions. It's a constant process.
So like health and safety, there's a lot of drills that you run to make sure that in the event something happens, these well-documented plans actually function the way we expect them to.
If you're not testing your plan, you don't have a plan. These things can change every year.
So they aren't developed in a vacuum and then we leave them there in the vacuum and then we break the vacuum and go, we need it. Oh, 1966. That was the last time this was updated.
That is what happened with 9/11. Everybody got on the panic. We're making our plans. We're going to do it. I would estimate about 75% of the businesses that did emergency planning at the time, and I'm not talking just continuity, business continuity, that's a part of emergency management. It's a critical part, but it's a sub part. They did their emergency plans. They patted themselves on the back. They put it on the shelf. They filed it on the server if they were smart enough to save a digital copy, and they've not looked at it again since. You need to test at least annually. It can be a tabletop discussion like we're having. It can be more advanced with maps and little pieces like your Warlords games or whatever.
Yep.
You can actually do a full active test, a simulation within your workplace with mock injuries and mock disasters, and go through the whole process if you want to see how it's really working. But you need to do something every year.
So the business continuity deals with, okay, we need to take our operations and move them somewhere else for a period of time because we have no physical access or no power. But the emergency management takes into account that we've had a crisis at one of our facilities, and we've got potentially people in small spaces that are trapped and injured, and we need to make sure that the location and people that are there are safe.
That's right. It's facilities and personnel is the overall emergency management aspect of it. Business continuity typically, not always, but typically looks at how do we get the stuff back up? How do we get back to running?
Right.
And it concentrates on data and the related resources. That's great if you have that. It's key, because if you don't have that, you can have all the rest and you're still going to fail.
Yeah.
Emergency management, more planning, prevention, mitigating what you can't prevent, your response, your recovery, and of course, as always, testing it annually. It's looking at how do we get the people away from the disaster.
Right.
So we always called that fire warden testing in the past, or fire warden training. We ask fire wardens to do much more than just get people out when there's a fire. They are an evacuation team. So let's drop fire warden and let's call them evacuation wardens, which is what they really are. You've got to train those people how to get the people out, the other employees, their fellows, out of the building. But you got to be able to train them first. To train them, you have to have a plan on your evacuation scale. Who's going through what doors? How many people are in a specific area? Just that aspect of itself is a plan unto itself.
Right.
And that could take 3 days to 3 months to develop that aspect of it. You got to start right from the very beginning. It can be as small as you need. It can be as large as you need. It depends on where you already stand with what you have and what you're missing.
So obviously there are a lot of benefits that we're talking about with having a plan, like ensuring that employees are safe, and if something happens, that we go in and are able to make them safe and potentially evacuate them. What are some of the possible, and we don't need to get into specifics, but are there any specific legal implications of having a plan that are mitigated by having a plan?
Oh, if you don't have a plan and something happens to your staff member, you're responsible for them. Chances of you being successfully sued, 100%. If you have a plan and you show that duty to care and a standard of care, you've done everything. You're showing that you've done everything possible, reasonable, to protect your employee, to save their life. You're now no longer negligent, which you would be if you didn't have the plan. Yeah. Right off. I mean, that's a big saver.
And again, record keeping, you've got a training record saying the person did or did not go to this training that we set up for them.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can be also held responsible for your customers, by your customers and by your suppliers.
Right.
Because a lot of times you've said, I'm going to buy X number of goods from your suppliers, and I'm going to resell X number of goods to my customers. If you haven't got those plans in, again, you could be theoretically considered negligent. There's another lawsuit. Interesting
point, too. I can recall when I was a former trainer, I would go to a facility and I was required to attend health and safety training and evacuation training before I actually stepped in the building. So you would meet the admin assistant or receptionist, and they would say, sign this, and someone would come out and walk you around, show you all the emergency exits. If you hear, that's your clue to evacuate through the nearest store and meet out by the by parking lot B.
I had a potential client, one of the large auto manufacturers, asked me to come in and talk to them and look at their possibilities for shelter in place situation. The first thing when I walked through that door, even though I was only going to be there for a few hours, sign this. Here's what we require of you. There's your waiver. You're on your own if something happens, because you understand what we want out of you. Now, unfortunately, that never took place because my view was different than their view and what they were looking for. I was a little more in depth, I guess you'd say, but still, they ended up with a plan in place that suited their needs, they believed, and they're showing that duty of care. So bravo to them for that.
They made an effort, which is probably not the case for a lot of businesses. Let's talk about any special equipment that you need to do this. Is this something that you must invest millions of dollars in to create and share a plan?
For me to do up a plan, the most important piece of equipment I have is what's between my ears and my laptop and my computer, because I'm putting everything that I know, I've learned over the years, into that computer. I'm creating a plan. Every plan is going to be different. There's really nothing special other than those things that are mandated that you have.
Right. Fire
extinguishers, escape routes, flashing lights for those who are hearing disabled, those various things.
Yeah.
There's no real heavy equipment cost. The cost of a plan is basically the knowledge of the person who's coming in to do it and how many hours he or she is going to have to spend doing it.
So we're not investing in new computer systems and terminals and this, that, and the next thing?
Not necessarily. It can be adapted to what you already have in place.
Good to know. Back in my day, when we did these emergency management plans, there were hard copies kept at key locations throughout our various facilities. And then we also had copies online. Why are hard copies still so important these days? Are you a big believer in paper copies?
Oh, I'm trying to become one of those paperless people.
Yeah.
Because I know it's environmentally friendly. A paper copy, a hard copy of any type of plan is something that as you're dashing out is easily grabbed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're one of the people that most people have a laptop sitting on their desk now, but the last company I was with, we still had local towers on our desk that were connected to the network. It's easier to grab that hard copy than it is to grab that tower and the monitor and everything that goes with it. It's even easier still to grab that hard copy as opposed to, even the laptop. Because now, okay, you've lost the building, you've lost the power, you may have lost your server.
Your network connection.
If everything's on that server, you still don't have it. So a hard copy is still going to be critical in a couple of key locations.
Yeah.
And in case of your WHMIS information, it's still mandatory.
Yeah, to have hard copy locations. Google it, WHMIS.
And WHMIS has changed, by the way. We have the new global harmonic standard in place. It's not what it was when we first started doing them 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I've been out of it now for about 10 years, so I probably am.
I used to teach a WHMIS program. I will not teach a WHMIS program. I'll help them get their documents together and their binders. I won't teach a WHMIS program anymore.
So what does the acronym WHMIS stand for those that aren't following along?
Workplace Hazardous Material Identification System.
Okay. And it's a series of paper sheets that identify chemicals and exposures and things
like that. They're hazards.
Yeah.
What you need to be treated with, that sort of thing, yes.
Cool. So as we wrap up, what are the benefits, and it sounds like there are some, what are the benefits of working with a professional like you versus a DIY initiative?
There's a number of benefits. The first one is that you're getting the most updated knowledge. You're getting somebody who specializes in that. So the chances of something being missed is going to be less. It also takes off the personal liability of you and your company in case you did miss something that would have to end up going through your business insurance. Most importantly, it's there are things that are going to be involved that'll come up as you're going through it that you won't necessarily see. Anybody can download a template off of the internet. A template's a great place to start, and anything is better than nothing. But you could miss critical key factors that surround not only your building, but your type of business, your personalities of you and your employees, the work environment, the neighborhood, local weather, environmental considerations that normally you wouldn't think would have an effect, and it is going to when it blends with everything else. So having the professional come in and do it for you, who can look at your business with a dispassionate eye, and that's critical, to see what needs to be done. It just protects you far better.
And like our auto mechanic, who we hope has replaced a few brakes before they did ours, you've done this a few times. You've learned it all. I'm sure you've got a knowledge base of things that potentially could go wrong or might creep into the conversation that you can introduce and say, have you thought of this?
And for me, I think one of my biggest benefits is when it comes to this stuff, I am a natural pessimist. If I can think it's going to happen, it possibly could. So I'm looking at more scenarios than the optimist ever would. Which is not to say I'm a negative person in life, but could this potentially happen? You're darn right.
In this instance, it behooves you to be a bit pessimistic and to say, let's think of every possible scenario and put mitigating factors in there.
Exactly.
Have we missed anything? Is there anything else you want to tell everyone about emergency management?
The most important thing, please, just do it. It doesn't take long. It's only going to be as expensive as what you need. If you need a basic plan because you're a small entrepreneur, couple of $1,000s.
Yep.
If you're a major corporation,
multiple locations, and
it could go anywhere from hundreds of thousands to millions. It all depends on what you need. It also depends on what you've already done.
Right.
So if you've done a basic template yourself, it's not going to cost you that much because we take into account what you've already done.
So they've done some homework.
Sure.
Does that mean that it's a good thing for people not necessarily do it themselves, but write out what they think the plan is according to the template, and then present you with it and say, hey, I've done my homework. I've sort of spent some time doing some thought.
The first thing that they have to do is they know what the risks are in their neighborhood when it comes to infrastructure and regular things that happen with weather. Listing those things out can save hours and hours worth of work.
Rather than you quizzing them going, what's this?
And
what's
asking
that?
all the other businesses in the neighborhood and looking at meteorological studies and this, that, and the other thing. If you've got the basics already, you're a long way ahead.
So you said just do it because it makes sense, but it's also potentially a legal requirement for some businesses to do some part of this, if not all, under Ontario Health and Safety Law.
Not under Ontario Health and Safety Law necessarily. I mean, that's your WHMIS standards, your WSIB standards, those things you have to do. And if you're doing those properly, that takes away some of the problem in doing your emergency management because you're eliminating the hazards that could crop up.
Right.
It's not mandatory yet by law to do an emergency plan, to do a business continuity plan. It's an ISO standard, International
Safety Organization.
Yeah.
Former ISO guy.
It's considered to a degree when you buy your business insurance, but nothing's legal yet. Nothing's required.
Yeah.
And look how long it took to get WSIB standards legislated. It could take just as long. And I was told 15 years ago when I started, it's not mandatory, but it's coming in the next couple of years. Like the cure for diabetes, we're still waiting.
We're still waiting. Where do people reach out to contact you, to work with you, and how does the process begin?
There's a number of ways they can get a hold of me. They can do a search on Facebook and look for 1033, TEN33, Incorporated Inc. on Facebook. You can Google that. You can send me a message at TEN33inc@outlook.com to my email. You can give me a phone call to 905-809-5440. Any of those ways to approach me, I'd be happy to get back in touch with you. Give me an idea of what your business is about. Go to 1033inc.com.
You have a good website. I was browsing it the other night.
Oh, thank you. I haven't updated it in recent times because, again, I'm the entrepreneur with so many other things. I haven't done that. There's a link right there for you to get in contact with me through email and my webmaster who monitors all that as well.
And learn more about you.
Exactly.
Great. Greg Long, president and founder of 1033inc. Thank you for joining me and schooling us on something, again, we don't really think about too much. And again, it's called different things, but emergency preparedness, emergency management, it's pretty damn important if you're running a business to put some thought and effort into it, especially if you're an entrepreneur.
It's my pleasure to be here.